Hello, everyone, and welcome to this first seminar series, uh, Navigating Beyond Academic Waters with AGU H3S, Expectations, Collaborations, and Service. Before I hand things off to our speakers and our panelists for today, I'm going to give a brief overview of Quasi while folks are getting settled. My name is Julia Masterin, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Education and Outreach Specialist for Quasi. Quasi is a consortium of universities for the advancement of hydrologic science, Inc. And we're a nonprofit organization primarily funded by the National Science Foundation. Our mission is to empower the water community and advance science through collaboration, infrastructure, and education. We do that through a number of ways, but two main ones through our data services and our education and outreach services. Quasi's data and compute services provide tools and support for the entire life cycle of data, from data discovery all the way through to publication, with some collaboration in between. Quasi hosts two data repositories for water science data, primarily HydroShare. The hope is that by providing the support and infrastructure, we can help researchers formulate and execute their data management plans, be effective data stewards, and meet the requirements of funding agencies. The other side of our organization are our community services. These include grants, workshops, a summer institute at the National Water Center for graduate students, webinar series like this one, a virtual university, and more. I'm going to take a few moments to let you know about some upcoming deadlines, and then we'll get started here. Applications for Snow School are open. I'll post the link in the chat in case you are interested. This is a week-long field school where participants learn about snow measurement methods from experts. There's no prerequisites, but it's an extremely popular program, and we're looking forward to hosting it on the West Coast for the first time in many years. The application deadline is October 22nd. We also have a series of virtual workshops going on right now. The Perceptual Models Workshop Series is designed to gather input from the broader community as the conveners work towards defining perceptual models of hydrologic behaviors across North America. These are day-long workshops beginning with a series of keynote talks in the morning and then followed by a synthesis discussion in the afternoon that's open to the larger community. They're free to attend, and each workshop focuses on a different region in North America. We only have two left, those being the interior agricultural regions and the island regions, coming up in November. And with that, thank you so much to our conveners at AGU H3S for putting together this series of webinars and for inviting these fantastic speakers. And thank you to the speakers for taking the time to share your insights with the audience today. This is the second in a series of 3 monthly webinars. This month, our conversation will focus on bridging the gap, collaboration, and building your networks. A few logistics as we get started. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the Quasi YouTube channel. Secondly, we ask that you use the Q&A functionality to submit questions to our speakers. We'll get to as many as we can. Maybe take a moment now to familiarize yourself with where that functionality is within your Zoom. And finally, we expect that all involved with Quasi Cyber Seminars uphold the Quasi Code of Conduct and promote and maintain a professional, considerate, respectful, and collaborative virtual environment. And with that, I will pass the mic on to Ashley Kirkland to introduce AGU H3S. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today for our cyber seminar. I'm really excited to get a chance to speak with these panelists about their research and their work. But before we dive into that, I want to just give a brief overview of the organization behind this series of seminars, the American Geophysical Union, or AGU, Hydrology Section Student Subcommittee, H3S. We are not just students. I'm actually a postdoc researcher, but it's a collection of students and early career hydrologists who are working to provide opportunities for professional development and networking among geoscientists and hydrologists. If you go to our website, which is aguh3s.org, you will find that right now we are putting on the River Cup. You may have seen it on Twitter or Blue Sky, wherever you get your science news. But essentially, this is a big, fun engagement thing where we are having folks vote on their favorite river And so hopefully in a few weeks, we'll know what the most loved river among hydrologists on the internet is this year of 2024. So go check that out on our website or on our social media. And we are also having open membership applications. So we're going to be recruiting a new class of H3S members to begin in January 2025. So if you're an early career hydrologist, if you're a student in hydrology, feel free to check out our membership page and submit an application if you are motivated and interested in joining. That is H3S. My colleague Delaney Peterson is also here from H3S, and I'm going to pass it over to her to let her introduce our panelists briefly, and then we'll get started with the Q&A.
Hi, everybody. So we're really excited to introduce our three panelists for today. First, we have Dr. Amy Bergen. And so Dr. Bergen researches the influence of human activities on rivers, streams, lakes, and wetlands. She's the lead principal investigator of the AIMS, or Aquatic Intermittency Effects on Microbiomes and Streams project, which includes collaborators across 5 states and 8 institutions. AIMS integrates hydrology, geochemistry, and microbiology to better understand the impacts of stream drying. We're also really excited to be joined by Dr. Allison Myers-Pigg. She is an earth scientist at the Pacific Northwest National Lab who studies aquatic organic geochemistry. In addition to her work in the River Corridor Science Focus Area, she also co-leads the exploration of coastal hydrobiogeochemistry across a network of gradients and experiments program, which emphasizes community-driven open science and spans several universities and national labs. We're also really excited to be joined by Dr. Jill Barron, who is a senior scientist with the U.S. Geological Survey and a senior research ecologist with the Natural Resource Ecology Laboratory at Colorado State University. She founded and co-directs the John Wesley Powell Center for Earth System Science Analysis and Synthesis, which facilitates working groups for collaborative research in earth science. And also, if you guys have anything else you would like to say or introduce yourselves with, we would love that.
Nothing from me. That was a nice introduction to us all. Thank you.
Great. Well, I will kick off the Q&A. I would like to ask each of our panelists to maybe reflect back on your early career stage and tell us a bit about how you identified collaborations when you were getting started, since all of you now work in such wide-ranging and diverse networks of collaborations. Dr. Barron, would you like to go first?
Sure, thank you. I should also mention I'm an aquatic biogeochemist. I work mostly on nitrogen cycling in high elevation systems. And when I was first getting started, I was so not a subject matter expert. I'm probably still not. But what was successful for me was actually finding out who the experts were for the work I needed to do. In this case, the very first thing was taking lake sediment cores to reconstruct the history of alpine lakes and look at whether acid rain had been having an effect on them. I'd never done that before. I had studied plant ecology. So I cold called scientists whose papers I had read and said, would you help me? And every one of them was enthusiastic and offered yes. And that's how it took off. And they would introduce me to their colleagues. So not being afraid to call people when you don't know the answer to something or you need help was a huge a step up for my career. So I guess don't be shy.
I'll go ahead and build on what Jill said there and agree 100%. The way I came into graduate school was in an interdisciplinary collaborative project called the Lodic Intersite Nitrogen Experiment 2. And I found out about that super collaborative project because I found a list of scientists that had done the first iteration of it. And same thing, I cold called them. I was from a small liberal arts college. I didn't really have a very extensive scientific network, and my advisors at that college didn't have a lot of connections into the field that I wanted to enter. And I received the same kind of warm reception, people that were just really willing to engage and kind of give me a sense of what graduate school was and the differences between places. And it has paid off tremendously in my career.
Yeah, I can build upon this, also my internet's being a little bit laggy, so I apologize if I am a little bit delayed for folks. But yeah, I totally agree with everything that Amy and Jill said. It can be really intimidating, particularly for introverts to cold call people. And I find so from my perspective, I find that intimidating still, even though I've been in the field for a long time and I know a lot of people. And so one of the things that I have also found super helpful, in addition to the cold call or the cold email, is going up to people at conferences, particularly poster sessions and things. Like if you know that there's somebody's research that you're interested in, going up and starting a conversation with them while you're at the conference, I think can be super beneficial and has helped me really build my network across my career.
Something else you can do, I didn't have a good support group either, like Amy suggested, but but I've tried to do that since with my students, is making sure I introduce them at conferences to people they should know about. Because once that connection is made, then everyone can follow up.
I think that's a really good point to sort of jump to a second question. Um, how do you decide when like these informal networks and sources of support are something that you want to pursue in terms of like maybe writing a grant together, getting into forming a longer term partnership or a collaboration? Like how do you decide that this is something that you see as a successful collaboration in the future? Oh, I should decide who's going to answer. Dr. Bergen, will you go first on this one?
Sure. I think that it depends a lot on your career stage. And since my impression is we're mostly focusing on very early career stages here, um, I'll try to to hone it a little bit in that regard. I think at that stage, it's really finding somebody that is like a science friend that you enjoy talking about your science with. So one of my longest term collaborators, Dr. Lydia Zeglin at K-State now, and I were grad students at the same time. And I just always really enjoyed talking science with her. We kind of came at it from different perspectives, but had the same common language. And so finding somebody along those lines that you can kind of cultivate a long-term kind of scientific, um, it doesn't have to necessarily be a formal collaboration. We didn't formally collaborate until years later after we were grad students, but stayed in touch and like kept up on, checking in at conferences and talking about each other's science. And then by the time we were ready to do that step of writing a grant or a big paper together, we had this kind of relationship to continue to build on. So I think in some ways the term networking kind of is a strange one for scientists, right? We often are avoiding the business world, where that term is a lot more important, like a lot more used. I think of it more as like building long-term scientific friendships and thinking about, how your areas of science overlap, and then where there's interesting gaps between what, how one person sees the world and what the other one does, and that becomes fruitful area for either papers or proposals to grow from.
I could pick up on two of those things. I think those are really good. Building a friendship, but it doesn't have to be a friendship. It could also just be mutual respect or similar interest in the same kind of questions. Those are the kinds of things we try to do at the Powell Center, is build people come together around a question they're really interested in. So you're already ripe for wanting to collaborate. But you could do that anywhere if you have those kinds of conversations that Amy just said. And they can last for your lifetime and build on. The other thing is that some professional societies actually try to foster this. I think I'm getting the name right or wrong. ASLO, the American Society for Limnology and Oceanography, holds these seminars or these in-person meetings called EcoDAS. And I'm not even sure what that is about, but they have themes and they bring together early career researchers around that theme. And while they're there in that week, I remember there was one recently, a few years ago at the university at the Flathead Lake Biological Station. And they broke these early career researchers into groups. People mutually agreed on the topics, and they sat down and wrote a paper right there. Many of those papers got published rapidly. Yeah, thanks. And were publications of a bunch of UCR students and early career who are still collaborating just because they were forced to do it fast and come up with a product. So those kinds of things can be very productive.
Yeah, I might just add that, and I think that both Amy and Jill sort of touched on this, is it's really about building a relationship with somebody in terms of a professional relationship, right? And that can be grounded, and for me, it's really about it being grounded in trust and mutual benefit, right? So how is the relationship helping us to both grow as scientists and as people? And that definitely can evolve throughout the length of those collaborations. I've had collaborations start as professional relationships that now they're some of my like best friends, right? Where it's like you get to know people through time. And really building that trust, which takes sometimes a long time to build, right? So you might know someone professionally for many years before you actually get that momentum. So having some of those places that Jill was just talking about, where you're kind of thrown into working together, can definitely be beneficial. But also playing the long game, I think, can be beneficial as well. And maintaining those conversations, saying hi to people when you see them, or if you're at a webinar with the person, sending them a quick note and saying, hey, it was cool to see your name on the webinar and things like that. I think all helps to build that trust.
Thank you so much. This might be sort of a specific Allison related question, because I know you work in sort of community science and a focus on like building relationships with people who maybe aren't traditionally like in the academy or in a national lab. Can you speak a little bit to how those relationships are built? And then if anyone else is interested in chiming in because you have experience with sort of stakeholders or community members, I'd love to talk to the rest of you about that as well.
Yeah, so I can start and speak a little bit about like different versions of the meaning of community, which I think for us has, a really multifaceted word. And I will just say that again, trust is the most important thing. And so whether we're working with tribal nations that we work on their lands, or if we're working with a university that has maybe a different set of resources and styles than the National Lab System does. I think that building that trust and understanding exactly where people are coming from and what is not asking too much of people, I think is really critical and important. So really having conversations, building that trust, understanding what people are really interested in, I think kind of goes across all of those different lenses. And that can be tricky to do, I think, with communities in the sense of a community of people as opposed to maybe a community of researchers. There's definitely different tactics that you need to take. And I think listening is a really important one when we're working with communities of humans, and making that connection on a human level and not just being the scary scientist in the room, I think is really important. So being relatable and really trying to understand where people are coming from who have extremely different worldviews from yourself. From a working with other types of scientists, I work with other national laboratories as well as university collaborators, and I think for me, a lot of those same things apply, and really trying to make sure that everyone is communicating their background as well as kind of what they are able to bring to the table, right? And so I think that understanding the differences between academia and the national labs is really important. And I learned something new every single day, which is exciting in that regard.
I can't agree more that listening is probably the most important thing you got to do. I work a lot with land management agencies. My research is in a national park, and I work for the U.S. Geological Survey. So the idea is to provide science that can be applied. So you need to find out what their needs are, and you need to again build their trust. But listening is probably the most important thing you can do, especially as a scientist. People think of us as either we know it all and we're going to tell them what they should do, or they dismiss us. So start out first and win their trust.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with everything that's been said. I guess I'll add maybe some perspective of building community within groups of other scientists that maybe don't speak the same language. We also work with stakeholders and stuff, but sometimes we're trying to collaborate across scientific disciplines. We do that on this project I lead called AIMS a lot, where we have hydrologists, biogeochemists, microbiologists, and we're all coming into the science with assumptions, and we need to lay those assumptions about how we see the world on the table so that we can all communicate clearly and then listen to the other party or group's perspective. And I think a good way that our group has done that is to try to actively get in the field together and do science together, because you realize when you're in the field with a hydrologist versus a biogeochemist that maybe we're talking about the same thing, but we come at it from different angles. And there's nothing quite like being on the ground to help facilitate some of those conversations, build the trust too. The field is wonderful for that.
So that collaboration across disciplines, though, it's necessary to answer almost any of the questions that are facing science or society today. And so it can be super exciting once you get past that. You said this and I interpreted it that way. And so you need to work at that. One of the things we do at the Powell Center is when I have working groups. So the Powell Center is a synthesis center that brings together people around questions of their choosing. It's almost always interdisciplinary. They come for a week at a time for intensive interaction. And one of the things we require while they're there is that they take a day off and go hiking or rafting or skiing, depending on whatever season it is. And that becomes that day of sharing ideas and building that kind of trust and interaction. So I'll stop there. There's nothing more important than that collaboration around people who like each other and want to solve problems together.
Thank you so much. We do have one question from the chat so far. It's for Jill Barron, and it asks, but everyone can chime in after maybe you get a chance to go. But specifically, this is about applied research. So you mentioned that a lot of the research you did has been very focused on practical applications, especially because the USGS works with a lot of land managers and national parks. How do you make your research more applied when you're developing proposals? The question asker says, I'm really interested in making my research applied during my PhD, and I want to communicate more with stakeholders and local parts of the community.
So when I started doing this research, which is a long time ago, and it was always for the Department of Interior, I took the easy route of getting funding from Department of Interior to do that research. And so it was a harder sell to say we have these important scientific questions to ask as well. So, but we did that too. Now the National Science Foundation and NASA and DOE and of course EPA, they all have grant application opportunities where basic science is linked to its applications directly. So I think that it's not that difficult anymore. I mean, it's difficult to get funding from any agency, but it's not that difficult to say, here are the questions that have to be asked that are important for advancing the science, and here is the application to which they would be put. And for some of these agencies, it's even it helps you to say, and here's the group of resource managers or users that I will be working with at the end, and have them chime in and say, yeah, we support this research. So when a few years ago, the U.S. Geological Survey was exceptionally fortunate to have a director, Marcia McNutt, who's now director of the National Academy of Sciences. And she, when she came in, talked a lot about, what was the word? Well, it's Pasteur's quadrant. It's science that is put to use. And I'll think of it and I'll put it in the chat later on. But it's not just science for its own sake. And I'm not sure there is such a thing anymore. All science has an application. But I don't think it hurts you at all to write proposals that say, this is how it will be used, and these are people who would like to have it. So I guess the difficulty comes in making sure you have that audience of people who are receptive to it and want to use the information you provide. That would be your upfront work that takes time to pull together. Use-inspired research.
I'll add a little bit to that. Another term I hear used a lot is community engaged research. And so I think that both of those have at their kind of core the idea that you're engaging with the potential users of the research at the beginning, before you have maybe even fully conceptualized the question and the research design and whatnot. And that, again, comes back to building relationships. You have to kind of know in general what you're looking to get out of, a scientific study, as well as what they want to get out of it, and try to co-develop questions that can address both needs.
Yeah, I was just gonna say one of the terms that I've heard is co-design, which is I think the same thing but a different name. And really, as Amy mentioned, starting at the base level, like before a word has been written down on the proposal, really thinking about ways that everything can be designed in a co-design way. And I think that, as both Amy and Jill has said, is building those relationships are important, right? Like you don't want to do helicopter science or anything like that, right? So you really want to make sure that you're building the relationships, understanding what people need. And I think going to seminars or the National Academies was mentioned, things, going to some of those workshops, things like that can be really helpful to meet people as well, because I do think that it can be sometimes overwhelming for people who are in the community, if they're being reached out to, cold called to a lot. And so if you build those relationships early on and you can meet people in different settings, I think that again can really be helpful to having co-design be really fruitful.
Thank you all so much. We've talked a lot about building scientific friendships and finding building relationships with people in interdisciplinary fields and in the community. But since we do have sort of an early career centered audience right now, I was wondering if anyone could speak to finding mentors. I know Dr. Bergen, you mentioned initially feeling like you didn't have a big network when you left your PhD program or your education, and then did you find people along the way who could guide you and help shape your career in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak a little to that. I think in this conversation, it's really important to have some distinction between some terms. And so the terms you hear a lot at this stage of your career are advisor versus mentor. And then I'm going to introduce a new one, sponsor. And those three things can kind of do very different, feedback and advice giving for your career. So an advisor is usually somebody that you turn to for advice. It's obviously somebody that can help you like navigate a system, answer questions about how do I get my degree done, things like that. A mentor has more of a kind of emotional social support kind of component to it. So somebody that can, help, has been in that situation and can relate to you and help you kind of navigate it from a variety of levels. And then a sponsor is somebody that can actively advocate for you, open doors for you, give you access to opportunities. And so I think when you're starting to form your network, you want to think about who's filling those different roles for you and make sure you have people in those different roles that you feel like are able to, go from the nuts and bolts up to the, actively helping you make those collaborations and networks. I'm not sure that there's like any special way to do it other than just like what Jill said earlier, just being brave and getting to know people and trying really hard not to make it transactional, right? So I think that's also really important. If people perceive that you're, just like a favor for a favor kind of thing, that's not generally a relationship that people feel very invested in. And so I try to come at it from a perspective of building a genuine connection with somebody and thinking about, what you can both benefit from in building that relationship. And I think when I think back to some of my earliest ways of building my network, it was through some of what we've discussed already. It was a project I was really ingrained in, the Links to Experiment, but I was also an early Eco Days participant, Jill, so I was glad to hear the shout out for that. I still work with some of the early career people I met through Eco Days. We wrote a couple of papers and, still bump into them at meetings and see their science. And then, as you go into different regions, I think it's also important to kind of go to some of those regional meetings, build your regional network and not ignore, that kind of aspect of getting to know the local environment, as well as kind of your national network and in your scientific societies and whatnot.
I really like those three categories that Amy just described, and they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. You can have a mentor who is also a sponsor, and you shouldn't only have one mentor. We need advice on all kinds of things, life stage advice. Sometimes a lot of graduate students, including me when I was one, was a young mother and working on a degree. And, how do you navigate all that stuff and still come out on top as a professional and not hurt your family at the same time or your own mental health? So those are all important things that go into a professional career. I forget what else I was going to say. I think that's Amy's got it right. And having all of those kinds of people and having different types of mentors, they don't all have to be older than you are. You can have advisors who are, or people that you work with in your office or go running with. Everybody can offer you help on this. Some of the mentors, I was lucky enough to have mentors come to me and say, how can I help you? Maybe it looked like I was floundering and they were reaching out, but I am grateful to them for having done that.
Yeah, I'll maybe just add one more category, which has been really beneficial to me, is peer mentorship. So people at your exact same career stage that you can really mentor each other through everything that, Jill and Amy were just talking about. Because it's a journey, right? And that journey looks different for every single person. And so having a cohort of people that are at your same career stage or maybe just a little ahead of you as a peer mentor can be super beneficial.
I'll add just one more thing. A tool to help you kind of visualize this that I like a lot and use in my own practice is a mentor map. There's a really nice example put together by the Earth Science Women's Network. So if you Google ESWN mentor map, there's a really nice visual. And I think that's a good exercise to print off and kind of think about the sources of support that you need and who you're getting from. And again, hearkening back to this idea that you shouldn't just have one mentor. You need I think of it almost like your own personal board of directors, right? To help you navigate this career journey that you're on.
Thank you.
Can I add one more thing?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Sorry about that. Amy just mentioned the Earth Science Women's Network. There's all kinds of help support systems like that out there. Actually, your H3S is one of them. So, this is a group to ask questions like that too and get feedback. But there's help out there for almost any question you want to ask from professionals that look like us or you or, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think something else I had wanted to bring up is I know that you co-lead a bunch of these workshops at the Powell Center. I was wondering if you could tell our attendees a little bit about how they could get involved in sort of those, like how they find a good fit.
Sure. So I don't actually co-lead. These are proposals that come in. So the John Wesley Powell Center for Analysis and Synthesis was started by me in 2010, and it was a shameless clone of another really successful synthesis center called NCES, the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis. And we are very similar to them in all respects, except any Earth system, any Earth science question is fair game to come to us too. Whereas NCES is largely ecological in a broad sense. So we're funded by the US Geological Survey, but we also get substantial support every year from NSF and other federal agencies and now foundations. And scientists come together around questions, complex questions of their choice. So they build a proposal around, oh, let me think of some that are going to be starting up this coming year. Give me a second on that. They build a proposal, they pull together the team of scientists that they want to address that question. Okay, so here's one. Actually, this is a good one because I just got out of a meeting of critical zone people. This one's being headed up by someone at PNNL, John Mallard and Margaret Zimmer and Aaron Sebald and Kendra Kaiser, and they're proposing critical zone as a meteor of hydroclimate ecosystem asynchrony. So they wrote such a proposal. It went through peer review. Our success rate is 20%. So it's not great, but it's not as bad as some other organizations. And in it, as they write a proposal for synthesis, it has to be interdisciplinary. It has to be, they have to have knowledge of the data they're going to pull together. We have very rigorous diversity requirements. We have to have a range of career stage, gender, ethnicity. They have to meet those. And if they're successful, we fund a postdoctoral fellow and 2 all expenses paid meetings to wonderful Fort Collins, Colorado, to do this synthesis. So it's hard to have early career scientists call up cold and say, I'm interested in being part of one of these. I mean, you can call me and I could try to match you to the groups, but it's not a place where unless you want to write a proposal yourself, and I would love to see those. A number of our proposals are early career. Well, John, actually all of those scientists are early career. John just got an ORISE fellowship, and so they're recent PhDs. We love proposals like that. So we welcome projects like that, but it's not easy for one person by themselves to say, okay, I want to be part of this, unless they come in at the entry stage of a proposal. So I don't know if that helped. There are synthesis centers. There's about a dozen of us now worldwide, and we all meet all the time and talk about how we can enhance each other's or synthesis in general. And some of them actually have on-site postdoctoral positions. So NCES is one of them in Santa Barbara. If your project is hydrological, but also ecological, that's a possibility to apply for a postdoctoral fellowship there. There's another synthesis center that's focused on biodiversity out of Leipzig in Germany. It's called SDEV, and they have on-site postdoctoral fellowships. So we're the exception. And so those are other opportunities that I'd be happy to shed more information on if people want to know.
Thank you. I do see a question from the chat. Maybe I will send this one over to Dr. Myers-Pig first so that she could tell us maybe. This question is, my PhD advisor once told me that I was a part of the lab until I wrote my first paper without him. I wonder if the panelists could tell us a story about their first collaboration outside of their graduate or postdoc lab, and what was it like? How did they find their role?
Yeah, so I feel like I was a little bit of a late bloomer in this regard. Actually, the very first academic job that I ever applied to when I was very early as a postdoc, I got feedback, which was awesome that I got feedback on my application, and that this was the exact feedback that I got was, you don't have any papers outside of your PhD lab yet. And so I thought a lot about this and really tried to think, okay, how can I build my network around this? And I think a lot of what I've done, over probably the last 5 to 6 years is try to work with as many different groups as I can. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear my dog squeezing his toy right next to me, but it is quite loud for me. Uh, and being willing to sort of contribute to maybe large perspective papers or synthesis papers, things like that. So that's something that's been really helpful for me, where it's like I have a colleague who's like, man, we're writing this paper and we really need research in this area or something like this. And I volunteer and say, hey, like I can do that. I can help make this conceptual figure, or I can help research these things. Really that helps to build your network, because then there's a lot of other people that you can get to know and to work with and things like that. And so how I got involved in a lot of those was me just expressing interest, right, to people in my current network. Like, I'm interested in getting to know people outside of my network. Are there opportunities that you're working on that you could bring me in on, and things like that? And that has been, just expressing that interest has been really helpful. So, like, maybe you have a friend in a different lab, and maybe they're working on something that you can help them with. Things like that.
So the way you phrased the question, Dawn, made me think of something that is super important too, which is that, and shame on your advisor for not bringing this out very early. You need to be transparent from the very beginning about who's going to write what and who deserves authorship and what are the criteria. So that's a big part of any of our synthesis groups at the Powell Center. We're not going to tell you how to do it, but we want to make sure that from the very beginning of your synthesis effort, you have talked about it with everyone else so that there's no surprises. And so some groups say, well, everyone's an author until they opt out. Other groups say you have to, and they develop these elaborate spreadsheets that say you have to contribute X, Y, and Z, and that helps determine the order. But don't leave it up to somebody's imagination. If you didn't know that he was going to, or she was going to diss you because of this, that the fault's not on you necessarily.
Yes, I will absolutely agree with the idea of having difficult conversations before there's a problem. So develop policies, like Jill's saying, for authorship. And that also relates to the mentor-mentee agreement, right? Like, you and your mentor should have very clear conversations, or as clear as possible. There's always some ambiguity in terms of like expectations from both directions. So that's like your first collaboration, right? Is with your mentor and your advisor in grad school, and figuring that out. And so, I was thinking about this direct question. Technically, I think the first collaboration I would have had outside of my postdoc would have been with my first, outside of me being a postdoc, was with my first postdoc. And there was a lot of learning there, figuring out, we were very close in our ages and career stages. I was just out of postdoc, she was still in. And so it took some learning to figure out how to navigate that kind of change in my responsibility as an advisor and a mentor to her, as well as figuring out, my own personal philosophy around authorship and things like that had to be honed over time. And I think it has been heavily influenced by being in some of these collaborative environments and seeing different ways that they do operate. Somebody's comment made me realize, or think, to also offer the idea of these research coordination networks. One thing that I was involved with as a postdoc, so it didn't count as my first collaboration outside of my postdoc because I was still a postdoc, was one of these RCNs, which was focused on denitrification as a tool, as a process to measure across terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. So it was really fun as an aquatic ecologist to start talking to terrestrial ecologists and say, how do you measure this process that we both find very difficult? And I learned a lot there. And I've been involved with 2 other RCNs over the years as a result. And those are great opportunities to just kind of, if one is existing, to reach out to the organizers and say, how do I get involved?
Yeah, I just want to add to the RCN thing. Like that's such an amazing opportunity and they're quite inclusive usually. So, I've been invited to workshops that RCNs have hosted as well as webinar series. So, in this post Zoom world that we live in, it's a lot easier, I think, sometimes to actually engage with these types of networks because while they may have all hands in person, there's also oftentimes seminars and meetings that they have virtually that you can get involved in. So, as an example, there is a RCN that is on sea level rise and saltwater intrusion that a lot of those folks we collaborate with as part of one of the projects that I work on, which is called Compass FME. And I started going to their seminars and working with them and stuff. And we ended up writing a perspective paper that I was able to be involved with that was led by the RCN members. And so that's a really, really wonderful example. And there's a list, I think, on the NSF website. You could just kind of look through them and see which ones are available. They usually have websites that you can join and get on their mailing list and things like that.
Thank you. That idea to look into the RCNs is a really helpful one. Uh, Amy, I think you've sort of touched on one of our other questions that we'd prepared for you all, which is this idea of having really clear boundaries around mentorship agreements and authorship agreements. I was wondering if you could speak to, in these larger collaborations where there's maybe a lot of different priorities, how conflict resolution can get handled, what sort of tips and tricks you might have accumulated over your time.
I don't know about tips and tricks, but the biggest one is have the hard conversations before before there's an actual problem, and live in scenario land, right? Like, well, what if this? What if this? What if this? And that way you're not necessarily caught off guard by, and you won't think of everything. Like, there have been surprises that I never could have anticipated, and I think that's true of almost anybody that's been involved in some of these big projects and collaborative groups. But the more you kind of are in them, the more you see some of the same things creeping up, right? And it usually comes down to resource allocation and credit allocation. Those are the two things where conflict can really arise. And so having very clear policies up front just around those two things, I think, can head off quite a few problems. When conflict arises, I think it's important not to be conflict averse, right? There are some, I don't know, feelings that like, oh, and I'm a Midwesterner, like I am like not culturally adapted to a lot of conflict based on where I grew up. So this is something I've had to work on, not being afraid to say, no, that's not what my understanding of our agreement was. This is what I understood. But coming at conflict not from an adversarial perspective, but from a conversational perspective, and trying to, get to the point where you're both having the needs met. Because when there's conflict, it's usually indicating that one party's needs are not met in some way. So being able to clearly state what your needs are is an important skill, but then also being able to listen and understand somebody else's perspective and try to find common ground is the I guess most universal way to think about conflict resolution.
Yeah, having this mutual respect is so important. Another thing, if you have the opportunity to choose the people you're going to collaborate with, you try to avoid divas or people who think they know all the answers. And that's something we actually work with people who are writing proposals for the Powell Center, is we make sure that who they select are people who are collaborative. Sometimes that means the world's expert in whatever, let's say it's atmospheric carbon cycle, doesn't get invited. I'm making this up, but that's because even though there would be terrific knowledge imparted, it might be so unpleasant that you would rather not have that person in there for an intensive activity with a number of other people. So if you have a choice, choose your colleagues. I love how the professional societies, and you did it right here for this seminar too, you pose a code of ethics and a code of conduct, and that happens. People agree to abide by that. It's not an empty checkoff. It's something that they have read through and say, okay, I will respect people. I will not be confrontational. I will listen. All those things help.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything that Jill and Amy were just saying. I actually just recently started collaborating with a group of people that I've never worked with before, and one of their criteria that they said for bringing anyone new into the fold was no meanies, like no mean people are allowed. And I thought that that was really something that I've seen a big cultural shift in our communities in the last 5 or so years. Like Jill said, starting this meeting with the code of conduct, all of the major interdisciplinary and national lab and university projects that I work on have a code of conduct that people sign before they start working on that project. One of the projects that I work on, we actually always start each meeting with a reminder of what that code of conduct is, similar to the way that you did. And so I think for me, it all comes down to communication and constant communication of what the expectations from all parties are, and making sure that that's continually revisited and not forgotten.
Thank you so much. I think all of us have kind of noticed this shift towards making sure things are clear and communicated ahead of collaborations or ahead of meetings. And I think that's a really valuable addition. We have a little bit more time. Um, I wanted to ask, maybe broadly, this should have been an earlier question, but could each of you speak a little bit about uh, maybe what sort of things you're doing now in your career that you're proud of and that sort of fit in this collaborative science sort of scheme that we're talking about today? Maybe Jill, will have you start this time.
I will start this time. I am the most senior here. And so what I'm excited about right now scientifically is just this past year. So I run a long-term ecological research program, which I started back in the 1980s. And about 2 or 3 years ago, I looked at what we were doing. It's an instrumented catchment. It's in Rocky Mountain National Park. We've been asking questions of it using paleo techniques, modeling, a lot of experiments, and a huge amount of monitoring, ongoing monitoring. And about 2 or 3 years ago, I realized that all of the questions I really had wanted to ask, I've been very lucky to have asked. And I wasn't really interested in starting new primary data collection. And so it was like this revelation of, I'm done, but I don't want it to stop. So I have been very, very lucky in being able to pass on the monitoring and the research to a former student of mine who, after doing a couple of postdocs, just landed an early career faculty position at the University of Colorado. And she has an NSF grant, and I have USGS money to help her out. And then I was able to write a proposal for 5 years to synthesize all of the data we never asked questions of. We've collected data on hydrology and meteorology and atmospheric chemistry and a lot of water quality and ecological, limnological data. And we've only addressed a little of it with the publications we've come out. So we have a synthesis proposal, and I've brought on a new data scientist. And the three of us together, my former student, this data scientist, and I, are going to have a great time, not just looking inside what happened over all these years within Lockvale watershed, but what it means to look at other alpine and mountain ecosystems. How do we compare, and what kinds of global change questions can we ask? So this pivot was a natural thing that came out of wanting to change career paths. I had a mentor, one of these first people I cold called years ago about taking lake sediment cores. And he had great advice. He said, every 10 years, you want to change your focus. You never want to get stuck in a rut doing the same thing over and over again. And I don't ever feel like I did, but that was such good advice. You always want to have a new question, or even if it's a slightly new direction, that's super helpful to go. So I don't know, I think I rambled on too long, but that's the kind of stuff that's making me excited right now.
I think that's really exciting. It's cool to see that you've got so much data, like sort of outstanding, that you get a chance to synthesize all of it now.
Yeah.
I'll build on that, Jill. I'm really proud of what we've done with the Ames project. I wrote that grant, or kind of wanted to do a project like that because of my experience as a graduate student on the Links 2 project and how pivotal that was for my career development and interest in building a collaboration as the cornerstone of my scientific approach in my research program. And wanted to give that opportunity too, as well as answer some really cool questions around stream drying and the impacts on water quality and stream microbiomes. And so we're at the point where that project is winding up. We're in the 5th year of it, and we have, again, more data than we know what to do with at this point. So kind of what you were saying, Jill, rings true. I'm hopeful we'll be able to address some of the questions we had in the proposal, but a lot of that's coming with student papers that are starting to come out and things like that. It's really fun to see the project mature to that, but also to be able to see forward a little bit about how long we're going to be able to work with these data sets moving forward. It's one of these 10-year segments of my career, I think, Jill. So I'm excited to be kind of in the middle of that period, I think.
Yeah, and I mentioned our 3 PIs, but there's a whole laboratory underneath Bella's program and we have new postdocs and we have collaborators across the world. So it builds on this career of building those collaborations. Very exciting for you, Amy.
Yeah, I would just say for me, like kind of in the same theme, is building new collaborations off of existing collaborations has been really fun. So I'm about 8 years out of my PhD, and so I'm starting to get to the stage where I have collaborators who have students that want to collaborate on new things with me, and so there's a lot of programs actually through the Department of Energy and the National Lab Systems where people can write proposals to come work with the national labs as a graduate student or as a postdoctoral researcher. And so starting to ramp up a lot of those collaborations that have been spin off of longer, other projects or informal collaborations sometimes has been really fun and rewarding for me.
Thank you so much. We are getting towards time now. So Dr. Amy Bergen, Dr. Allison Myers-Pig, and Dr. Jill Barron, thank you all so much for taking the time to be here with us today. I've really appreciated all of your conversation. Oh, we do have one speed round question. Maybe we can get through it.
I have a quick
round
answer to this one.
How do you say no when there's a lot on your plate?
For me, the barrier is whether I feel obligated to do something because of expectations set somewhere outside of me, or whether I'm intrinsically excited about it. Whether what I say, like when I first get the opportunity that crosses my plate, am I like, that's interesting? Or am I like, hell yeah? And if it's a hell yeah, then I run at it.
You
Yeah.
certainly have to prioritize and say no. Consider yourself. I used to be, I would feel so honored that somebody wanted me to participate in something. And then 6 months in, it was like, wait a minute, I'm in for something I don't want to do. So say no.
Yep, I agree. If you're not stoked about it, say no. That's okay. Wait for something that you're stoked about.
I think that might be the theme of our webinar, be brave, reach out, cold call, and be brave and say no. I think that's a good thing to end on, something good to take away. Julia, did you have anything we needed to wrap up with?
No, thank you all so much. This has been a great conversation, and we really appreciate you all taking the time to join us today. And with that, have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you all so much. Have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thanks.
Thank
You
you.
too.